Among all the gaming franchises across all of history, there's probably none easier to make fun of than Sonic the Hedgehog. As the series has gone on, I think we've steadily discovered a problem festering with Sonic's very conception, and that is how Sonic is a designed-by-marketing character. He was conceived from corporate contests and filtered through departments of localizers before hitting a specific demographic to put specific pressure on a specific competitor. Sonic isn't art for art's sake. He was made for corporate competition, which wasn't a bad thing at the time. For the purposes of Sega competing with Nintendo for the 90s, it was a fantastic success. Which means that the end of the 90s, along with Sega's console dominance, dragged up the unfortunate question of what exactly they were supposed to do with Sonic now. There's a lot of unfortunate things about being a platforming hero designed to be way gosh darn faster than Mario to sell consoles presumably faster than Nintendo's. Newton's first law already implies that an object moving at greater speed is going to be harder to control. Speed stresses hardware, speed pushes camera systems, and speed also requires levels big enough to accommodate for speed. Game designers have to build a lot of terrain for the player to cover, and they're going to have to build those levels fast. Which is why if you stop to look at the backgrounds in most any conventional racing game, you'll notice a whole lot of corners being cut. In Sonic's case, those conflicts are doubled because he's a side-scrolling platformer competing with Mario. There have to be enemies, death traps, bottomless pits, and a 2D camera angle obscuring almost all of these on top of levels that have to be big enough while staying interesting enough for the player to race through it all. So when it comes time for the games to make their best impressions, the first level is almost always the one that gets it right. Seriously, the idea of this video is like cheating. Whereas later levels tend to slow down into puzzle platforming as the challenges of going fast are compromised for maintaining the game's longevity, the first levels are always the ones with real flow. The first level is the one that's actually built for speed, until you're suddenly stopped to experience an evocative example of how Sonic Team learned, unlearned, and relearned how to make a Sonic game work. The design of the character might have been the pure marketing genius of exploiting 90s playground identity politics, but the design of the games themselves were a bit less graceful. So if you want to see how Sonic is doing at any given part of history, the first level is the place to look. Anyways, I gotta go through about 25 years of mainline console installments in about 39 minutes here, so let's start from the top. Green Hill Zone introduces us to what most first levels of Sonic would end up looking like: green hills, palm trees, and water in the distance. For this critical first installment, it also solidifies Sonic as the alternative platform hero, not just in visual design but gameplay as well. It's more forgiving and oddly more sandboxy than the rules Mario established. What would have been an insta-kill pitfall in Mario is instead a safe drop to a slower alternate route. Plus, you can scroll backwards. Both create some good replayability by giving us multiple routes to learn that can cut down experienced runs of these levels down to well under a minute. Plus, if you get hit by a bad guy, you don't instantly die, but rather fill the screen with a dazzling dance of second chances, which is almost required by this focus on speed. Obstacles are sometimes placed in the middle of straight long shots of momentum. Most of them are annoying progress blockers that simply slow you down, but sometimes they're legitimate dangers that cause damage. I found myself hitting these barbs at the end of Act 3 almost every time I played this level, regardless of how ready I was to anticipate them. And sure, Sonic can go fast, but apparently fast isn't the same thing as responsive. Reaching top speed can take 5 seconds of wind-up that starts at a painfully slow crawl. These problems are addressed in sequels, but they start the franchise off with an opening level that moves too fast for deliberacy, and sometimes too slow to just feel good. If you're playing the way you're meant to be playing, holding right and staying on the high ground, you're whizzing past meaningful signposting and charging into inconsequential damage. Act 3 ends with what would be another staple, a bouncy easy first boss fight that leads to the next zone and thus the next game. The Green Hill Zone is now the Emerald Hill Zone, and quality has increased across the board. Movement has been reworked. Although it still takes 5 seconds to wind up to max speed, your lowest that you start with is now a little higher. Plus, this time you have the Spin Dash, an infinite portable boost that means you don't actually have to wait those 5 seconds anymore. Another nice little touch is that the background is scrolling faster with more layers too. Plus, there's no asshole thorns placed right in the way of fast lanes. The quick reaction obstacles here just make you change to a slower lane, rather than stopping you dead in your tracks. It's a smoother and easier level that I found more fun to play, but that also compromises on the replayability and verticality of Green Hill Zone. And when you compare the two side by side, the Green Hills definitely look more, thick than the Emerald Hills. There's this big tower towards the end with no equivalent in Sonic 2's map, and Green Hill Zone's Act 2 is thickly layered with multiple ways in and out of the top, bottom, and maybe even a middle route, while Emerald's Act 2 threads 2 central lanes that are more exclusive. But quality trumps quantity. Sonic 2 is more refined, focused, and faster paced. This time you get to the boss fight and the next zone after only 2 acts. Which brings us to Sonic CD, the first real spin-off-y game on this list, but a necessary inclusion by virtue of its original intention to be Sonic 2. After the first game, Sonic Team set to work developing a Sonic 2 for the Sega CD that was supposed to release alongside a very similar Genesis version. But the team split up. Lead programmer Yuji Naka, along with many other Sonic veterans, moved to a different Sega division in San Francisco after growing dissatisfied with the corporate establishment in Japan. But their own version of Sonic 2 ended up being favored over Japan's Sonic CD. They're two very different games, but since they were made at the same time for different platforms, you have this interesting crisscrossing level of tech behind both of them. It shows us that technology doesn't always flow in a linear improvement of progress as platforms develop. Sure, we have this game on a CD, but that iconic synthesized Sega from earlier is now just... Sonic CD uses Sonic 1's sprite, but lets you spin dash from Sonic 2, and remember how satisfying that spin dash was? How it kicks up dust all over the place? Now it's just this. But that's okay. Instead, we have an FMV intro animated by the same studio that did Dragon Ball Z. We've also reached the first part of the series where the music gets good. Really, really good. Like, stupid good. And we've also got an opening level that's bigger, longer, thicker, and more multi-dimensional than the games before it. Get it? You travel through time by way of speed. Hit a sign to set yourself to past, present, or future, reach 88 Sonics per hour, and suddenly you're in one of 4 alternate versions of the same level. Combine alternate routes, have a deep multi-level stage with alternate versions of alternate routes, and you have a crazy amount of variation for any given run of this level. It's so diverse. I did it 4 times, and none of those runs looked remotely the same. And there's such a depth of different places to go, and nice smooth routing through all of them, that the only real thing to nitpick about is the same complaint endemic to all the 2D Sonic games. Moments where boosters plus tightly placed interactables plus a screen size too small to see what's ahead makes for a game where going fast is more of a liability than an advantage. One that the level shoves you into far too often. So at this point in history, Sonic Team had split into 2 divisions, and Sega's console lineup was splitting into variations of failed add-ons. We're back to the Genesis, with a couple of installments split between the same project whose lock-on cartridges can snap into each other to form one cartridge. Sonic 3 and Sonic and Knuckles were originally developed by the US team as one game, but it was split into 2 because of time constraints and memory capacity limits. I guess they forgot they were dealing with Genesis hardware around the same time Sega was slashing deadlines. So when you plop in Sonic 3 the way it was meant to be played, all souped up with the add-on cart enabled, the title is Sonic 3, Sonic the Hedgehog, and Knuckles. Confused yet? So was I back then. But strong Sonic sales were paying more than enough for the bills, so you have a kick-ass soundtrack done via a partial collaboration with Michael Jackson. Plus, they try their hand at a bit of storytelling, that's new. Little transition scenes intro and outro levels, while the first level of the game itself gets gradually torn up by a boss you finally meet at the end. The spectacle of Sonic 3 ramps things up way higher than the rate that the other 3 games were going at. And unlike the previous levels, the focus on this one shifts away from speed and longevity towards density. It's more of a straight shot, but one filled with stops to play with new elemental power-ups, search for secret minigames, ride along zip lines, and jump after enemies with a new splash attack that gives you something to do while flying through the air. There's a lot going on, and the classic complaint that it's all coming in too fast is mitigated by just doing it as Knuckles instead. Whereas before, you're just kinda stumbling through these levels, now you can play as Knuckles and go slower. And suddenly, I can avoid damage and I look like I actually know what I'm doing, even though I don't know what I'm doing and actually perform worse. Meanwhile, in the actual Sonic and Knuckles game, which was released about 6 months after Sonic 3, you start with one of the few first levels that's not a beach. That might be because this was technically going to be the midway point of Sonic 3, but anyways. The Mushroom Hill Zone iterates on 3's density by just packing on the gimmicks. Sonic's gone full circle at this point, back to traditional 2D platforming over Sonic-specific speedrunning. Racing past the background is now less important than using the background to fish your way upwards. It's one of the slowest first levels on this list, but might actually be my favorite for that exact reason. It's easily the most interactive level on this list, with usable items that turn into new mechanics everywhere. Sonic 3's density of minigames and special abilities is now extended to all these environmental devices that you could easily otherwise miss. The very mushrooms that look like background items are all bounce pads. It has you platforming through a diverse set of challenges at a deliberate pace that might turn into a tiring lack of focus later in the game, but as far as first impressions go, it sets it up pretty good, just before Sonic comes oozing down into a bit of a dark age. There's a 4-year gap here where Sega's console support was just as fractured and messy as Sonic teams' rival sub-teams themselves. The Saturn's life cycle has no reliably identifiable mainline Sonic sequels at all. It's all spin-offs, while the team tried, haphazardly, to make a magnum opus out of a 3D Sonic on the Dreamcast. And this is the moment where childhood fans should load up these old games again and face the music. Sonic Adventure does not hold up. Whoa! Yeah, no, it really doesn't. Just about everything with these cutscenes is wrong. They're terribly long, they're terribly cringy, everyone animates in and out of these 2-second loops, the script is bad, the voice acting is bad, and it all just looks so stupid. Whoa! And it's all wrapped up by this Tarantino-esque non-linear plot of 6 different intersecting arcs by a dev team who clearly had no idea how to make a fun story. But that's just the cutscenes. As far as gameplay goes, Sonic Adventure 1 practically wrote the book on how not to make a 3D action game. It gave future developers handy rules to follow. Rules like, don't start the game in the middle of a boss fight, don't have long sections where you're running towards the camera, don't make the camera switch its axis of action without retaining the relativity of your previously held direction. SA's camera isn't just at odds with the player, it's also at odds with the level. The standout example is here, right after these rubber band guardrails. The camera takes a sharp 90-degree turn outside of the player's control, and if the player is moving the stick right in anticipation of an upcoming right turn, they're just going to fall off the catwalk to the right. At the very beginning of the level, camera-controlled exploration is rewarded with hidden bonuses, and yet at the same time it punishes manual camera control by a delayed reset of the player's inputs to focus on I don't know what, while you're still aiming off towards your earlier focal point. So you've got to deal with that in addition to Sonic accelerating way too fast. He blasts off at the slightest tap of the stick in addition to the level designers placing insta-kill drops that the camera careens your movement towards. That is, when it's not just playing a little movie you have no control over. It's easy enough to just hold forwards and let the level go, but it's satisfying to take periodic exploration breaks on all these little optional islands. But these spots can be easily ignored, both because you can miss them by blinking and also because there's nothing of value hidden there. It's just as empty as the soundscape after the first real boss. Shouldn't there be an explosion or clanking metal or something here? This whole production is a shockingly amateur show, except for maybe the FMV and Kick-Ass theme song. If you were playing this game in the West on 9/9/99, then you already experienced a landmark year where games like Metal Gear Solid and Ocarina of Time fixed problems that made Sonic Adventure look instantly dated. Its North American release came a full year after the Japanese launch, which is the exact opposite schedule of SA2, whose North American release actually beat Japan by a couple days. Warning! Okay. SA2 starts us off with City Escape, and City Escape is a beloved and memorable level. Its version of a green hill zone is a bustling recreation of Yuji Naka's established home base of San Francisco. The game starts high with the spectacle of scraping down the pavement of a bustling sunny city to some upbeat pop punk, brought to you by the game's music director starting a band of his own and collaborating with established performers like Paul Shortino and Everett Bradley. It's a great moment. They even sync up the intro of the song to rev up as soon as he hits the pavement.
Attention all units.
But the rest of the game's sound design always shocks me whenever I load up this old level. The song may be great, but can you actually hear it underneath the cacophony? But at least City Escape is a fun little downhill jam. Most of it is wide open lanes without the optional stops of ring islands like in SA1, but rather periodic breaks in playstyle, going from the opening skateboarding to some light platforming to rail grinding to camera-facing set piece that's used to much greater effect. SA1's whale comes and goes in 10 seconds, and all you gotta do is hold a direction or you instantly die. SA2's truck follows you for almost a full minute and merely distributes damage should you not hold down a direction, though turning is incentivized with random ring placement and telegraphed attacks. When it's slowed down though, Sonic himself jumps and moves slower than SA1, but considering inherited camera issues, then that's actually an improvement. Handling is still wonky with inconsistent acceleration and unpredictable turning, but those problems are easy to ignore because for this level, and maybe this level alone, you see the team learning lessons from SA1 and building the kind of level that would end up defining some of the most well-regarded Sonic games of the future. And Sonic Heroes is not one of them. For starters, the theme song is hot garbage, let's get that out of here. The intro FMV still demonstrates the team's harsh grasp on sound design. And believe it or not, this is the first Sonic game I've played with a dedicated tutorial level. Sonic Heroes' big gimmick, as explained by the tutorial child fighting for audio dominance, is that you swap in and out of complex team formations, which takes the middleman out of that character select screen. First level has you flying through an ocean palace and oh my god. Oh my god, it's actually fun! I don't get it. The internet has conditioned me to hate this game. It didn't review well, it epitomizes the hatred for Sonic's weird-ass furry friends. An entire lifetime of social conditioning and stigmatizing almost any and all 3D Sonic games had me expecting this to be wretched, but I don't know, I had fun. Which can mean only two things. Either I'm the only sane person on the internet and everyone else is crazy, or the first level is not representative of the rest of the game. That's why this video is cheating, because the first level of Sonic Heroes is great. The formations give you a diverse moveset and a diverse level of switching between multiple playstyles quickly in what seems like a natural extension of Sonic Adventure 2's anal bead level design. Tails flies, Knuckles punches, Sonic speeds, but not at a horribly uncontrollable pace. You can press X to control when and where he uncontrollably blasts off. And best of all, the camera doesn't jerk around. In fact, most of the time it's all manual, which is all fine by me. Which means that getting good at this level and going fast is less about rote memorization than it is mechanical mastery and quick thinking. With responsive inputs, for once, you have a game where nailing off the right moves at the right time feels good, and going through it fast enough keeps your fingers and your brain active and awake. It's pretty great, except for this boss fight. I still don't know what's going on there. But I was pretty sad to tear myself away from this game after just the first level, which is ironic because reviewers blasted it exactly for the later levels. Apparently, glitches and clunky rail detection show itself around the same time that switching characters for mundane tasks becomes repetitive, around the same time that you realize you're supposed to play every level 4 times. Which is good news for me, really. The first level of this game was great. The first level of this other game was a mistake. I still can't believe that this actually exists. The Edge is adorable. So after giggling like an idiot at how pouty Shadow is that Mom just doesn't understand, a stage begins where you descend onto lines of rings you can't see because the camera's too far up his ass. And once again, after all the improvements they made after SA2 and Heroes, we're back to playing a character who just careens away, flying off on vacation if you tilt the stick for 1 second. After that first second, your turning radius just ends. This is a mess. This is not cool. It's a combination of high-speed loop-de-looping with a character who's actually supposed to be spending most of his time shooting, punching, and platforming because Shadow the Hedgehog is actually a collectathon?
Where's that damn 4th Chaos Emerald?
The whole level is backtrackable, so you can hunt down your collectibles, which are enemies you kill, which can be aliens invading the city, or just friendlies who are really just minding their own business, because Shadow is a sociopathic asshole. Depending on which side you pick and whether or not you meet the quota, you unlock alternate story branches. A lot of alternate story branches. So many, in fact, that if this chart is to be believed, then I have no choice but to be impressed. But if the gameplay underneath all those branches is so borderline unplayable, then where's the thrill in exploring it? I was gonna try and be a super cool dude and hunt all the aliens, but Alien 45 just never spawned in. This is a shame, because just one game earlier, Sonic Team had begun taking steps to alleviate where it went wrong. and suddenly they're the laughingstock of the industry all over again. If there's a rock bottom for the series, then this is it. It's a scathing example of just how small of a grasp Sonic Team has on the cultural footprint of their own series. It's a stupefying misunderstanding of why people used to like Sonic and why marketing him as an edgier alternative worked. And it's also an example of Sega's naive insistence to push products that take this IP in the worst of directions. The aesthetics of this whole ordeal are butt ugly, and it's somehow surreal and derivative at the same time. Any given screenshot of this map could look like a Duke Nukem game from the right angle. It's jarring to remember that this was a big 2-year project out of Yuji Naka's Sonic Team studio, one they were working on during the development of Sonic 06, a project that ultimately led Yuji Naka himself to resign. Under mounting pressure from Sega to keep shipping more Sonic games under shorter deadlines, him and his buddies quit and went indie. Around the same time, a second group of Sonic 06 devs also split off, going off to form a new Sonic team that would make Sonic and the Secret Rings. And amidst all the confusion and corporate restructuring, Sega still rigidly pushed their original Christmas 06 deadline, and this is after the project had only reached tech demo levels in May of 2005. This is a game with blatantly cut content in addition to being far too ambitious for the downsized team to chew, and the first level is a tire fire. Almost as soon as you walk off the beaten path, the game breaks. Hell, stay on the beaten path and the game breaks. Any given clip of gameplay, even any idle gameplay screenshot, will show at least 2 things screwing up. I don't even know where to begin. The conspicuously broken physics, animation, and movement systems here make this one of the most incomplete AAA games in modern history. But that's not even mentioning the regressive level design. After all the progress we've made, we're back to Sonic Adventure 1, with the roller coaster trying and failing to merge with natural beachside cliffs. A mechanical switch activating this big metal gate is a floating alien eyeball on top of a hill? Okay. Optional islands of minor ring bonuses beg you to stop in your tracks and explore, but neither speeding along nor taking your time is a good idea since you might unpredictably fall through the floor at any given moment. The level begins with a 13-second stretch of Sonic automatically moving along without you needing to touch the controller at all. Earlier 3D games had these same moments where you just hit a boost pad and kind of watch the movie play, but none had the audacity to go on as long as, and break as many rules as Sonic 06's do. You end up sliding across water hazards that you've been taught to avoid, and player inputs actually create more risk than if you just set the controller down on a table and let it go. But that's not even mentioning the continuity of this level. There's even problems there. So the intro shows Sonic chasing after this big airship at night, and then suddenly we're loaded into a map at daytime. The implication is that it's hours later and the chase has gone cold. You walk around town and talk to people, meet up with a friend, get a job, buy an upgrade, and then after a short trip to a beach literally seconds away, you're chasing after that very same airship like the night never ended. There's so much going wrong here. I could go on for days. A glitch montage showing what I saw happening for just 1 hour doing the first level over and over again could be 10 minutes long. Breaking that down would take forever, so at some point, we gotta move on. Sega began creating the Hedgehog game engine in 2005 as a means for optimizing HD game development. By emulating lighting techniques of CGI films, the engine was able to let the team complete the lighting work of a 6 to 8 mile action stage in just 2 to 3 days, a difference immediately noticeable by the sheer length, speed, and detail of Sonic Unleashed's first couple levels. With that huge roadblock of dev time knocked out of the way, the team could actually afford to build a lot of terrain a lot faster, and therefore create a game that's actually about covering lots of ground fast. And the first reveal of this game was genuinely impressive, a modern equivalent to the technological marvel of seeing older Sonic games speed through a stupidly huge level stupidly fast. The change in technology results in a change in how the next 3D Sonic games would control and feel, as well as how those levels were laid out. Sonic Unleashed ditches the organic rocks and cliffs of Sonic 06 to try and make what is a blatant roller coaster seem as inconspicuous in this city as possible. and your basic default mode of play now resembles the behind-the-back auto-run sections of Sonic 06, which were terrible for a myriad of reasons, but are okay here because you're in a hell of a lot more control. This is your basic mode of movement, the kind you're taught the tutorial with, and you can start and stop Sonic whenever you want. Reaching max speed is less about holding back and letting the movie play than it is about addressing a series of snappy challenges to make the movie play increasingly faster, unless you make the completely wrong judgment call. Which is a lot like Sonic Heroes, even though everyone hated that game. It's not perfect. The camera, the frame rate, the sounds all carry over some old problems, but the first few levels of Sonic Unleashed show the team demonstrating an uncommon moment of acknowledging their faults and being clever about fixing them. In fact, it almost feels like a reboot, thanks to its more lighthearted tone and upbeat style, which shouldn't even be a compliment when talking about E-rated platform mascots. So things are getting better! Except they're not. Unleashed is peppered with cutscenes that go on way too long with this cringy, Scrappy-Doo sidekick, and the visual design of everyone is hideous. The Werehog was a mistake. Unleashed's other half to its running sections are brawling sections, which is some of the most just below mediocre gameplay I've ever endured. It's slow, there's not a whole lot of variety and smoothness to its combo system, it's quiet, dark, and it is utterly, mindlessly boring. The level just walks you through the basics of this mode's play with no style or passion to it. Thoroughly unexciting, except for the parts where it seems to break the rules of beat-em-up brawling, like how you have to press circle to snap onto ledges, or how the frame rate dips so far below 30 that you can't even hit QTEs. It's utterly and unfortunately forgettable, which is sad because the other half shows them actually learning how to make a 3D Sonic game for once. But in the middle of this half-cocked momentum, we have Sonic 4, a throwback 2D platformer designed by none of the 2D Sonic developers. A studio called Dimps that made the Sonic Rush games on DS was heading up this one, and Sonic Rush was pretty alright, so it's surprising that they managed to screw up a side-scroller so hard. Yeah, it doesn't look great. Sonic's supposed to be wagging his finger, not his entire rotary hand. You know, somehow I don't think it was a good idea to be sticking this close to the Genesis assets. This blocky, low-res 3D Sonic on top of a stage of 2D CGI backgrounds that look like Donkey Kong Country isn't a great combination. The whole screen is blurry thanks to bitmap compression, and Sonic's back to going slow as molasses here. We're back to running into bad guys placed straight in the middle of the track because the level designer hates you. We're back to having a screen too small to see anything coming because despite the advances of having HD screen space, they barely even try to zoom the camera out. It's not a great throwback when the core problems of the games it's throwing us back to are made worse here. No, in fact, whole new problems crop up here. The homing attack is a gamble whenever two choices present themselves. It's a great speed boost and jump extender, but also a homing attack, which means if you want to jump somewhere away from a target, you'll end up homing towards the target instead. Retracing your steps is a struggle, dodging damage is unpredictable, the presentation is shockingly amateur again, the music's not great, and these levels are smaller than the Genesis ones. How? The bonus stage is the saddest part, really. It's lazy, it's lethargic, it conveys none of the energy of Sonic 1's bonus stages, which were marketing money shots. And playing this now, after knowing what came before and after, just makes me realize that Sonic games aren't damned to mediocrity by default. They've had so many moments that come so close to greatness. Instead, Sonic is just one of the most horribly mismanaged franchises in history. How the hell does the same level of quality that you see in Heroes, Unleashed, and later Colors and Generations get stamped onto this? The whole IP is a roller coaster of quality. Sonic 4 is at an end of the Sonic spectrum opposite of Colors. And Sonic Colors is another big, fancy, high-budgeted 3D game in which you press start on the menu and it's weird that you just go. You just run right off the menu. There's no story cutscene, you're free to turn the tutorial off, you just do some stretches and off you go. At this point in the series, I was so used to expecting some kind of lengthy bullshit that I actually thought I was doing something wrong starting this game up the first time. But nope, you just press the button and it goes and it's great. The music's great, the game looks great, there's no wacky gimmicks or really any negative changes in sight, and for the first time in a long while, it just feels like the team had the time, the money, and the competency to make an original game they envisioned, without any sudden setbacks or reinventions introduced halfway through development. The Hedgehog engine from Unleashed is back, and so is the style of its daytime levels. This time the camera stays far back enough for you to see obstacles coming, and it doesn't lag behind. You've got your long roller coasters with wide lanes of some actually pretty empty space, which just means it's free of the obstacles and sharp turns that would snag up Unleashed's camera. And believe it or not, the story doesn't begin until 2 acts in. And when it does, we see a shift to a self-aware, lighthearted Sonic who couldn't be more of a far cry from the surreal adolescent angst of games past. Plus, there's at least one good gag in the opener.
This amusement park has been constructed entirely out of a sense of remorse for my past transgressions, and is in no way associated with any sort of evil plot or premeditated misdeeds.
Well, that's a relief.
In between rounds of playing Sonic Simulator, you may notice that you can walk on top of the game's scoreboard and that Sonic will occasionally talk straight to the camera. At this point in the franchise, Sonic has become a fourth-wall-breaking cartoon. And I'm okay with that. It's a change that happened courtesy of the addition of actual writers. Ken Pontac and Warren Graff joined Sonic Team after previously founding Happy Tree Friends, which I guess does make some kind of sense. But the big gameplay gimmick with Colors is that the camera will occasionally pull back to a side-scrolling angle to have you do a bit of 2D platforming. In Generations, the camera would change angles to a side-scroller for a few seconds of zigzagging verticality. Here it changes angles for portions, if not entire levels, that exclusively focus on platforming. The two distinct halves of the game are now running and platforming, not running and brawling. And it's not really bad platforming attached to this game, but it does still feel out of place nonetheless. As the first zone's acts go on, you definitely end up with more of this than of this. The placement of the platforms and walls necessitates that you slow down and take a break, and that's really the worst problem I've found so far, which means this thing's starting off on a good foot. Side-scrolling platforming is a throwback feature that Sonic Generations didn't discard. Its reintroduction was the whole theme of the game, which is a really avant-garde story for Sonic. Although Generations retains almost the same gameplay from Colors, you have a few added mechanics designed to make even those slow platforming parts go fast if you know what you're doing. For the first level at least. Later on, it gets kinda silly. But the game begins awesome. Just like Colors, there's no intro cutscene. You press the button and you go, and I love that. But the design's subtleties begin just a few seconds later. See these fish? Unlike the classic Sonic games, they're safe for the first few seconds of screen time, meaning you get a visible and well-telegraphed projection of their attack. Players won't hit an obstacle they don't see if they're just speeding through, but they'll still have a threatening obstacle if you decide to stick around and grab the item. It's just one tiny little reason why I think this level's pretty darn great. Meanwhile, when you're modern Sonic, there's a few subtle differences in control going from Colors to Generations. This time, extreme stick movement doesn't necessarily merge Sonic left and right at high speed so much as it gently points him towards the stick instead. It controls kinda like a racing game, but you're not driving fast cars to hug corners, and instead are managing a moveset to blast through obstacles. Your primary decisions when going fast are choosing between a boost, a jump, a slide, and a drift. Almost every button is dedicated towards maintaining forward momentum, just like how endless runners like Temple Run work. So Generations is less of a racing game than it is a speedrunning game, which means it's probably the closest any modern Sonic has come to the design philosophy of the original games, of being able to skip levels outright as you learn to play through them quickly. Meanwhile, for the platforming sections, the camera zoomed way out to make good use of HD screen space, which Sonic 4 couldn't figure out, and the slow puzzly parts are arranged in ways that can still be skipped by reacting quickly into alt routes or higher jumps. In the first level, they're also subliminally telegraphed by changes in both the camera angle and the background. You basically hold down right and go nuts until it's obvious you're not supposed to, because the back of the screen will get darker and the viewing angle will get higher, implying that you're closer to the ground and should exercise caution. It's pretty great stuff. And you'd think at this point Sonic Team would have finally found their niche. Speedrunning-focused platformers with styles and soundtracks as festive as these don't come often. They sold well and they were a lot of fun, so why in the world did they have to do another reboot? Sonic Lost World is yet another Jurassic reimagining of how Sonic would play in 3D. This time, it's an unholy amalgamation of Super Mario Galaxy plus 3D World plus the powers from Sonic Colors plus a very flaccid, very decelerated version of Sonic itself. You build and maintain speed by holding down L to charge a spin dash, releasing it to blast off, and then pressing and holding it again to retain your ball shape, and then jumping to reboost your speed as you decelerate, and that whole process is just so complicated and physically nonsensical. In the last 3 games, you did the same thing just by pressing X. But if you do that, then you'll be speeding past all the collectibles and platforms, which are more of the point this time, so you're better off just walking around, which isn't as fun as rolling around because Lost World's core platforming is so rote and by the numbers that it's just uninteresting. It's not broken or glitchy like the last games. The platforming is solid, it actually feels good thanks to the bounciness of your animations, but combining it with the whole mess of other features turns these levels into headaches. Headaches that are worsened by these confusing networks of floating gravity-centering islands whose landmasses aren't landmarked enough to signpost you towards where you gotta go and what you should do to scope out the next hidden item. It's lacking the intuitive design of the Mario games it's inspired by and instead shoves counterproductive feature bloat in there, to the point where the responsiveness of your controls are now at the whims of level design, like the player-controlled gravity tunnel in Act 3. Meanwhile, those happy tree friend riders seem to have run out of steam with this one. At least the cutscenes aren't long. The level design is a mess, but hey, at least we're finally at a part in the series where the games are coming out on time, finished, and polished. Sonic Boom was handed off to a new developer with new designs and a new engine to launch a new spin-off sub-franchise, meaning that Boom is the second installment of rebooted gameplay in over just 1 year. The long and short of it is that speed and platforming are barely part of the equation. The frame rate's broken, the shaders are broken, the animation's broken, cutscenes stutter for a few frames when switching angles, and the same challenges are repeated ad nauseum through a continuity that's also broken. Also, the soundtrack is the DreamWorks of music. It's generic-ass wannabe Danny Elfman, so let's fix that.
You know how much I like punching things.
The gameplay is chopped up into 5 styles: running, fighting, 2D platform puzzling, 3D exploration puzzling, and a zipline minigame that's so shallow and insipid that it doesn't even warrant mention. It just plays itself. In fact, so do the running sections. The game starts with a running track that's just straight dodging obstacles and nothing else. No mechanics for controlling speed, no alternate routes, no boosting, you just strafe and move while the frame rate dies. Or you don't. You can set the controller down and stop doing anything and it's just fine because you don't die in this game and the running don't stop. And then you get into a fight where you just mash punch over and over again, and you don't even gotta do that either, so just go set the controller down, make a sandwich or something, do your taxes.
Nice work, son! Nick?
The thing about trying to look at the level design in this game is that it's hard to even ask what level design. The first chunks of Lyric's tomb places the requisite blocks, but when there are no stakes to the game, what does it even matter where they're placed? The player's gonna learn how this game works through failing or attrition or the never-ending ceaseless character barks, but there's nothing much of a threat to your health or your progress until the puzzle chambers, which are clockwork, a paint-by-numbers rearranging of the same 3 puzzles placed at increasingly larger distances, mad-libbed onto a grid. Humorously, Amy and Knuckles have to go through their own puzzle chambers, even though minutes earlier they accompany you right to this room that everyone gets to after their puzzle chamber. The first level of Boom is not as broken on a fundamental level as that of Sonic 06, but it also lacks 06's spectacle. It's hard to even laugh at this game at its expense. But it's arguably the most incomplete AAA game launch since Sonic 06, and the fact that the Sonic name can even carry those titles speaks volumes for how lowly Sega regards its most popular brand. Their incessant demand for reboots cranked out fast by developers who haven't proven their competency and don't even have the time or assets to, repeatedly ended with the fracturing of teams and the cheapening of the brand. After the release of Shadow, the damage was done. Critics could no longer take Sonic seriously again. Colors and Generations, which I think are legitimately good games, still didn't reach desirable review scores. It's the perfect storm. Sonic is an alternative concept by design. It can't use conventions that are safe and reliable. At the same time, its focus on speed stresses development pipelines. And its publisher, Sega, routinely slashed the team's deadlines and budgets because they could. For most any Sonic game, you're guaranteed at least 1 million units sold, no matter how crappy it is. Meanwhile, the devs themselves stubbornly insist on pursuing unpopular ideas regardless of their resources. So what did Sega do with Sonic after the Genesis era was over? They pushed these games out cheaply, just relying on brand recognition instead of quality. Because Sonic is a mascot. He's an icon of a certain identity, an edgy alternative whose niche still weirds the hell out of the rest of the internet, but for the layman mainstream consumer, Sonic is a representative of gaming itself. During its launch, Sonic Boom sold just under 500,000 units on a console that sold 1 million units that same season. That was considered a failure, and it was a straw that broke the camel's back. So after a decade of subsisting off of brand recognition, it didn't matter if Generations Colors and the better half of Unleashed played well. It took the building of a game engine specific to Sonic to make it play well. And when you get down to business, Sonic's not about playing well. Sonic is about the politics of marketing, which is why we can go from 3 solid years of this, only to end it all on this.